of 1848 impact the political stability of Europe. I did my 2 Google Meets with period 6 and period 7. So now we're back, part 2 of this discussion. So how did the revolution in Austria lead to revolutions in Italy? So now Italy is another example of revolutions that had kind of like differing objectives. So first off, we have in Italy Italian nationalists and liberals that were seeking to end foreign domination of Italy. So if you look at this map, you'll see that the regions of Lombardy and Venetia in the north were controlled by Austria. The papal states in the center were controlled by the Pope, and then Naples and Sicily were controlled by a ruler who was related to the King of Spain. The only area that was actually controlled by an Italian was this region of Piedmont, Sardinia. So Milan, Lombardy, and Venetia wanted to expel their Austrian rulers. We have these Bourbon rulers in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, again, related to the crown heads of Spain. And then you have this House of Savoy in Sardinia, Piedmont. They wanted to be liberal. So you have kind of, again, all of these basically competing viewpoints. Many Italians wanted Austria to be removed because they felt that in order for there ever to be Italian unification, Austria had to be out of Italy. Initially, many people looked to the Pope, Pope Pius IX, who ruled as Pope from 1846 to 1878, who had a pretty liberal reputation. A lot of people thought that if Italy was going to be united at this point, it would be united under the power of the Pope, especially with Pius having this more liberal reputation. But at the same time in Italy, you have these more radical elements developing in Italy. And Rome was kind of like a center of this political radicalization, led by some of these people here, Giuseppe Mazzini and Giuseppe Garibaldi. Now, later, when we talk about actual Italian unification, we're going to talk about Mazzini, Garibaldi, and a third man, Cavour, being kind of Mazzini being the heart of Italian unification, Garibaldi being the muscle of Italian unification, and Cavour, who's from Piedmont, Sardinia, being the brains of Italian unification. But we're not there yet. So in February of 1849, radicals basically radicals establish a Roman Republic. So it's Mazzini, it's Garibaldi who are establishing this Roman Republic. As a result of this, the Pope was actually not happy about this at all. And they really, Mazzini and Garibaldi hoped they could use Rome as this base of operations when this Roman Republic was declared. They wanted to unite Italy under a republican government. Now, at the same time, you have the King of Piedmont, who is a man by the name of King Charles Albert. And you can see his picture there down in the corner. This is King Charles Albert with the very impressive mustache. That's Pope Pius IX, by the way. So, radicals in Piedmont in March of 1849 are going to force King Charles Albert to get into a war with Austria. Again, because the idea being that the only way Italy is going to be unified is if we get Austria out of Italy. This was almost immediately crushed, where it says here, Austrian General Radetzky crushes Sardinia, Piedmont. So this does not go well. Charles Albert is kind of forced to abdicate the throne. And his son, Victor Emmanuel, takes power. And Victor Emmanuel II is actually going to become eventually, he takes the throne of Piedmont, Sardinia. He's eventually going to be the first king of Italy. But again, that's going to happen later. So while all of this is happening, this really kind of turns the Pope against this idea of a unified Italy. He thinks it's just too radical. So he asks the French to kind of come in and protect him. So French troops attack Rome to kind of prevent this Republican government from coming into fruition and to protect the Pope, who now has kind of turned against the idea of a unified Italy. And the goal is to prevent the rise of a strong unified state. So June of 1849, 10,000 French troops lay siege to Rome, and this whole idea of the Republic is dissolved. Pope Pius IX comes back as Pope, renounces liberalism, and really winds up becoming an arch-conservative. And he's really going to stand in opposition for there being a unified Italy. But a couple other reasons why this failed. The rural people did not support the revolutions. The revolutionaries were focused mainly on the urban middle classes. They didn't bring the lower classes and the peasants into it, and so they were not on board. The revolutionaries, again, were not united. You had some that wanted liberal governments, you some that wanted Republican governments, and there was a fear of this radicalization amongst the moderates that led to the collapse of the revolutions. And then again, lack of leadership, because you have Mazzini and Garibaldi trying to do their own thing separate from King Charles Albert in Sardinia. And there wasn't much experience among the revolutionaries. So what this does is it kind of sets Italy slightly closer to eventual unification, but does not achieve unification. The last place where there is a revolution in 1848 is in Germany. Now, mind you, Germany was the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is broken up in 1806 as a result of Napoleon. So no longer is a Holy Roman Empire. It's an image of Germania in 1848. So Frederick William the Fourth, because again, the Prussians loved their Fredericks and their Williams, and sometimes Frederick Williams. But so Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia, he ruled from 1840 until 1861. And he was mad as a hatter. And that's, if you've ever read Alice in Wonderland, you know what the Mad Hatter, that term comes from, like, people that made hats referred to as hatters. They would work with mercury, and mercury gives you mercury poisoning and would drive you insane. So that's where that term comes from. But he was insane, not because he actually made hats. He was anti-liberal, but a medieval romantic. He relied on the support of the Junkers. And if you remember, again, the Junkers are the nobles in Prussia. Prussia in the 19th century was efficient. It had a good economy. It had a strong military. So after, though, the February French revolutions, the revolutions of 1848 in France, there were many riots in minor German states. So we start to see some minor disturbances breaking out in some of the smaller German states. Austria and Prussia expected to intervene and crush these revolts. But you have the Vienna Revolution in Austria, which leads to the fall of Metternich. And then in March of 1848, we have a bunch of popular uprisings breaking out in Berlin. Now, the Prussian army was able to suppress these revolutionaries rather quickly because Prussia is known for having a good army. And King Frederick William withdraws the troops, and he actually winds up giving the Prussian liberals a big victory. And the king actually called for the Prussian Constituent Assembly to write a constitution, implying that Prussia would aid in a German unification. But this is not actually going to come to fruition. So here's a funeral for the Berlin fighters. So basically, then what happens is this Prussian Constituent Assembly writes a very radical and democratic constitution, which the king and the conservative supporters in Germany decided to ignore this. They're like, no. So in April of 1849, the assembly is dissolved. The king says, no, I'm going to come up with my own constitution for Prussia. He comes up with a system of three-class voting. Excuse me, sorry. And I lost my spot. Oh, yes. Three-class voting. Adult males could vote according to three classes arranged by ability to pay taxes. The larger taxpayers got more power. They elected 1/3 of the Prussian parliament. So then, in response, representatives gathered in Frankfurt because they decided, that they're going to, I skipped a whole bunch of things. They're going to come up with their own constitution. They saw this constitution that the Prussian king was trying to come up with. They're like, okay, this is moving more towards in the direction that we want to see the government. So the German National Assembly is established in Frankfurt, and they create a constitution for themselves that is universal suffrage, delegates arriving mostly from the middle class, and essentially what this Frankfurt Assembly wanted to do. Frederick William allowed for this new constitution to be written, like I said, that created this three-class system of voting just for Prussia. And the German liberals said, well, let's make a constitution for all of Germany. Like, they're really pushing forward with this idea of a united Germany. And so basically, the people that were sitting in this National Assembly, the Frankfort Assembly, were debating over what model should they follow? The Habsburgs, which would be the Austrians, or the Hohenzollerns, which would be the Prussians. And they chose the Austrian Habsburg Archduke John rather than the King of Prussia because he was a well-known liberal sympathizer. But he couldn't guarantee that he's going to have the support of the Prussian army. And so you could see a member of this Frankfort Assembly meeting. And so what basically happens then is they decide that they can't work with this Archduke from Austria because he can't, again, have the loyalty of the Prussian army. So then they offer the monarchy of Germany to the Prussian king. And that didn't wind up working out very well. So I'll get to that in a second. Some other things that were going on, now just to be clear, is what we have is what's referred to as the three Germanys. We have Austria being kind of southern Germany, Prussia being kind of eastern Germany, and then all these separate little kingdoms in yellow being the rest of Germany. And that's why we're having this kind of struggle. You have the liberals kind of centered more in Frankfurt that want to have this, power sharing agreement. You have Prussia that wants to be the head of Germany. You have the Austrians who are pushing to be the head of Germany. So the Prussian army is going to move to crush that Polish uprising that we talked about earlier. And the Prussian parliament disagrees with the Frankfurt parliament. So the Frankfurt parliament wanted this liberal government. The Prussian parliament, basically, they disagree. The Prussian army is going to invade a region that's kind of part of Denmark called Schleswig-Holstein. And basically, this horrified a lot of the liberals. Britain and Russia threatened war with Prussia. Prussia agrees to its own peace with Denmark. And the Prussian army kind of abandons working with Frankfurt. Austria regains control of Vienna with the revolutions they were dealing with. Frederick William deposes the Berlin parliament, so he gets rid of his uprising that was happening. The Frankfurt Assembly offers Frederick William to become the Emperor of Germany. But he declines. The reason why he declines is because he doesn't want the crown to be offered to him. He wants to be the one that sets the rules and dictates what type of government Germany is going to want to have. He doesn't want to be basically told what to do by these liberals. So the Prussian army crushes all the resistance, and in April of 1849, the assembly collapses, and we see a new German Confederation form. So Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia still wanted to be the ruler of a united Germany, but he wanted to be ruler of a united Germany where he got to dictate the terms of him being king of Germany. So in 1850, the German Confederation was reestablished, but Frederick was forced to accept the fact that Austria still has a large amount of leadership in Central Europe. Bottom line, there's a rivalry going on between Austria and Prussia over if there's going to be a united Germany, who is really going to have power in that united Germany. In the end, though, liberalism is completely discredited in Germany. It, like in Italy, has very little popular support. The union of the liberals and the more radical Democrats did not last. And really, you needed to have an army if you're going to be able to have any type of power in Germany. And there was a massive exodus of what we call the liberal intelligentsia, meaning many liberals who were educated decided that maybe Germany wasn't the place for them. And we see that militarism and this idea of hierarchy and all of that becomes kind of triumphant over everything. That's another image of the fighting. So in the end, all of these revolutions essentially fail. Now, before we go on to why they all failed, just wanted to go a little bit to England because we talked about how England didn't really have a revolution. We did have something, and I mentioned this earlier in some of the other videos, this idea of the Chartist movement, which could have been the prelude to revolution in Britain. But the movement kind of, in the end, kind of dies out. So there is some agitation in Britain, but it's not sustained. Essentially, with these revolutions of 1848, the Democrats are swept out of Europe. We see rise of other ideas, other options, which are like communism. But why did these revolutions fail. Again, they did not gain the support of the lower classes. The middle classes led these revolutions, but as they turned radical, the middle class did not want to go down that path, and they held back. Nationalism tended to divide more than united these different groups. So where in Austria, the Austrian kind of radical students and the Hungarians or the Magyars probably had a lot more in common than they disagreed, but they were like, nope, you're Austrian and I'm Hungarian, so we can't agree. Where revolutions were successful, the old guard was left in place and they turned against the revolutionaries. Some gains lasted, like the abolition of serfdom, but in the long run, most liberal gains would not be solidified until the end of the 19th century, when we see the unification of Germany and Italy and the collapse of the Habsburg Empire at the end of World War I. So it looks like conservative forces had triumphed, the turning point that failed to turn. But things had changed forever. Economic and social problems continue to be constant challenges to the ruling order. Things are not just going to, be all easy for them. And many of the limited liberal achievements remained very permanent, and again, is going to lead to the eventual unification of Germany, the eventual unification of Italy, the eventual breakup of the Austrian Empire. So in the end, they're successful, but not at this point. So why did these revolutions occur, and how did they impact Europe?